Okay, darlings, let's continue. Let's continue. So I'd like you to ask me some questions now. You've had a couple of hours to think about things. So what questions do you have, if any, about what we've discussed? The meaning of Tantra, the idea of the Buddha manifesting in different bodies, whatever you think. Come on. There must be some questions. Nothing. All right.
Venerable Rubina?
Yes.
Let me ask just a quick question. Is it necessary to have a personal teacher, someone that you know in real life, to practice tantric Buddhism, to do the visualizations, things like this? I don't have a personal teacher near.
I understand that. I understand that. Would you be able to learn to become a brilliant classical musician without relying on a teacher? Would you be able to really learn to know how to make cakes without relying on a teacher?
I don't.
Would you know how to tie up your shoelaces when you were a little girl if someone didn't show you? What do you think, Hillary?
I don't
Well,
think
there's your answer, baby.
And then I guess the following question is how does one, how does one find one? Does you need to have a personal relationship with the teacher, like one-on-one? Or is it not necessary? You can.
Two questions there.
Yeah.
Two questions. One, how do you find? So how do you think you'd do that one? That first one, how do you think? It's a really perfect question, Hillary, and it's very, very related, especially to this topic. So I want to think it through, to sort of force us to break it down into simple terms. So how would you go about finding a cooking teacher, a music teacher, any teacher? What would you do?
Right, as well as you discussed in the earlier session, you would go check out different teachers and see who seemed like they were knew what they were talking about. They were authentic. They were, you check them out, like Buddha said.
Exactly, right? Precisely. So that's the answer to your first question.
And then, do you need to have a personal relationship with them, one-on-one? I speak to them.
I understand. This is where it gets different, I would say, because because there's this whole other level of practice in Buddhism. Well, no, it's not even so different. Okay, let me just give you an example. So in the beginning, okay. Many people in the world, in Buddhism, among Buddhists, feel very close to the Dalai Lama. They feel he is their main teacher. Most of them have never met him and will never have a personal meeting with him. But okay, I'll put it this way, that doesn't stop you from seeing him as your teacher, because this is the real point here. Even with my teachers, Hillary, Lama Yeshe and Lama Yeshe are my two main teachers. I have many other teachers as well that I've received teachings from over the years, whom I've decided are my gurus, many of them. But the thing is, with my main teachers, Lama Zopa, Lama Yeshe, two things. First of all, they're my spiritual teachers, but also they're like my bosses. I work for their organization. So there's a separate component there. But I could add on two fingers the personal meetings I've had with both of them in 45 years. So it's fairly evident from that the answer is no. You do not need to have personal contact, although it certainly can help. But in the end, the real practice, and this I think is exactly the same as anything, maybe initially you've got to be close up with your cooking teacher, but eventually when you've internalized some of it and you have that teacher in your heart and you look at their books and you rely on their teachings on the video, because we've all got those now, you don't need to see that person because you've got them in your heart, and that's not even just spiritual. You'd have your mentor in your heart, definitely. We very much want to, because you want to please them, you want to do what they say, so you remember their advice. As you're practicing, you're thinking of what they said. If you're playing tennis, you're remembering what Federer told you about those backhands. So the real work is from our side as the disciple. They give the teaching. Federer tells you how to play tennis, and then he says, okay, honey, go off and practice it now. So actually, for that, even Federer could die, and you could still say he's your main tennis teacher. I think we could say that, and I think you get my point. So of course, so then so the real work from our side. So because we're talking here about a spiritual teacher and what that means, and there's a whole different kettle of fish here, where the real practice, especially when we're practicing the more advanced ones, but this is very much the Vajrayana, the tantric approach, but it's the approach that Lama Rinpoche takes all the way, and it's the best approach, and we can discuss this exact point now, because it's quite a tricky one. Is that, you know, that we do need that person. As Lama Yeshe said, Buddha is dead. Mr. Buddha, Shakyamuni is not on this planet. So, but the same thing, Bach is not on this planet. So my mother was my music teacher. So I could really say that I got that music from my mother. She got it from her teacher. They got it from their teacher. And you know what? You could track that back in an unbroken chain of real living music knowledge holders. There's a lovely word in Tibetan, rigsin, knowledge holder, right back to Bach. And that's valid. And that's the way that's what the teacher is. They're the living example now of Buddha, of Bach, or whoever you want to say. It's the same principle, actually. So, you know, once you've established in your mind who that teacher is, and if you happen to know them, you can certainly, you got to check up and then you request. I mean, when I first met Lama Yeshe, I heard teachings from Lama Zopa and Lama Yeshe for 2 months. And then I had a meeting with Lama Yeshe, and I mean, no, 6 months later, actually, in my mind, I decided he was my teacher. And then I'd taken refuge with him and everything. But then 6 months later, after the first course I had, I was back home and I made a decision in my mind that he was my teacher. And then I met him for the first time. And that's basically when I connected physically with him. And then I started working for him. But I mean, but in that period, the 10 years that I knew Lama before he passed away, or the 45 years I know of Lama Zopa, like I said, they're both definitely, from my side, I have decided they are my gurus, which means, and this is certainly in the Vajrayana, that they are the people I have decided are Buddha for me. My mother was Bach for me. Bach's dead, so I relied on my mum. And this is the interesting point. What we're trying to cultivate, this view, which seems awfully kind of esoteric in a way, but it's not if you use ordinary examples like I'm doing. And so then the key point, they always talk about developing what they call pure view. And what pure view, and it's really, we should do this every day with everybody, is stop finding fault. Once you've established that Federer is your tennis coach, you will definitely get the most benefit if you start to see Federer as the best tennis player on the planet, and everything he tells you, and your mind is wide open to his advice, you're going to play tennis really, really well. So it's got a very practical approach. And that's why when it comes to spiritual things, we often mystify it. We fall into, we just run around thinking this person, wow, too much, they're very charismatic, there must be the Buddha. We jump in the deep end, and then we start finding fault because we're just not using our intelligence properly, especially when it comes to spiritual teachers. I mean, we do more due diligence just for a decent cooking teacher than we would for a spiritual teacher. So we've got to use our intelligence. And then really, and even the first point is, even before you even start looking for the teacher, like me with the cake, I had to know exactly what I wanted to learn, which was a cake. Now, you've got to know, you check up on the teaching, you go to the Zen, you go to this, you go Tibetan. There's many variations of Buddhism, and you'll eventually find the one you connect with. Well, then that's narrowing down your options. It's like yoga. You like yoga in general, but once you start looking, there are 47 varieties. So you've got to narrow it down. And then the more you want it, the more you practice it, the more it'll become clear to you. You'll meet your teacher manifest in front of you. It's not cosmic, it's practical, you know. And then you do your really careful checking, especially when it comes to a spiritual teacher. You do your checking, you check their behavior, you check their students, you check their way they function, you check how they teach, and then you make a decision, then you request, and then you develop the relationship from there. And the real work is what you do in your daily practice. You with me, Hillary? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Good, darling. So just keep aspiring, keep wanting, keep practicing, and see where it takes you.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you so much. Somebody else, please. Questions? Anything at all about the mind, about attachment? I mean, okay, whatever. If you haven't got questions, I can't force you, so that's okay.
Rabina, is it okay to have more than one teacher?
Who's asking?
It's Elizabeth. I'm sorry, I'm in a cave. I don't have my camera working.
Okay, sweetheart. Yeah, of course. I mean, you can have plenty. I mean, I've got like 20 people I've decided who are the Buddha for me. People I've taken teachings from over the years. Absolutely, of course you can. So the idea is that I mean, in the Vajrayana, they go into it in much more detail. It's much more extensive, but we're touching on it here. But I'm all the time trying to show the logic of it, not to make it mysterious and mystical. So for sure you can have. So they're all different varieties. I mean, I've got teachers, like I've got my philosophy teacher, Geshe Tekchok, for example, whom I learned so much from. And I have great feeling in my heart for him because of those 2 intensive years I did Buddhist philosophy. I've got other teachers, I've got different things. But in the end, you see them all as different manifestations of the same Buddha mind. Remember I said before, the so-called Dharmakaya, the word used to refer to the actual unmanifest, all-knowing, all-seeing, all-compassionate, all-wise consciousness. That's the real meaning of the word Buddha. So then all these different teachers, you know, short ones, thin ones, old ones, fat ones, male ones, female ones, monk ones, lay ones, whatever, they're all different people with different shapes and sizes. But in your mind, you cultivate the view that they are all manifestations of the same Buddha mind. And the only reason for this, if we really break it down and see the logic of it, is to help our mind stay clear and get maximum benefit. That's all. I mean, the idea, eventually, when we're, you know, what we're aiming for, where we're heading, is the development of our mind to the point where there are no delusions and the virtues have been perfected. That's the meaning of Buddha, in essence. That's what we're aiming for. That's the goal. Like when you want to become like Federer. So the more you check on the person who's going to teach you, the more, once you've checked, you then request them. And then the more you devote yourself, and hear this word in a simple way, to that person, and every piece of instruction Federer gives you in relation to tennis, the more clearly you take that instruction, the more quickly you will be able to do it. So there's real logic in having what they call pure view. Of course, in the Buddhist view, it goes to much more subtle levels, you know. I mean, when you begin to understand the Bodhisattva teachings, for example, forget the tantric teachings, but the Bodhisattva, the sutra teachings about what a Bodhisattva is. A Bodhisattva, even a low-level Bodhisattva, already has such phenomenal good qualities, has so much less ego, even if they're not fully developed yet. But because they've got such powerful compassion, they are prepared to do whatever it takes to be of benefit to sentient beings, including do naughty things. I mean, this is a whole kettle of fish that's very hard for our mind to see. But again, if I use ordinary examples, I studied Kung Fu, right? And I had my teacher, Mr. Lee. And I loved Mr. Lee. I checked on him. I checked on his classes. He was an amazing teacher. I checked on his students. I went to one of his kids' classes, and he was a really excellent teacher. Now, his expertise was not the mind. His expertise was not cooking. His expertise was kung fu, right? So I decided he was my kung fu teacher. So I went to six days a week. I went to his classes. So because he could see, he wasn't stupid. I turned up at 6 classes and he taught 6 classes. If he taught 7, I would have gone to 7. He could see, it was hardly a no-brainer, that I wanted his kung fu. So I was so sincere. I was so committed. And so of course he pushed me to the limit. He would shout at me. Well, I didn't want to burst into tears and sue Mr. Lee for shouting. I was honored that Mr. Lee would shout at me because he knew I wanted his kung fu. He knew I was sincere and he could see my potential. So he pushed me to my limit. I was honored that he pushed me. Anybody, I mean, again, in ordinary life, you can see the advantage of that. So these lamas, when I first chose Lama Yeshe as my teacher, it took when I first met him, I had a sense, and then it took me 6 months of processing and practicing. From the second that I decided and I had my first meeting with him, it was almost like from that second when I had chosen him as my Buddha, it's sort of like I gave him permission to show me my mind, because that's their expertise. The expertise of a spiritual teacher is not it might be kung fu too, but it's the mind. And the Lama, only the Lama, the guru, the spiritual mentor, whatever word you want, the person you have chosen. I basically shook hands with Lama Yeshe and said, okay, mate, you're allowed to show me my mind now. Until then, I mean, Lama Zopa, I didn't see him properly as my Lama for 10 years. It took me 10 years from the time I first met him for the penny to drop. I even had a dream about him that showed me he was one of my gurus, but it took me a while to recognize. So in that period, he left me alone. He didn't start shoving, in other words, if I'd met Mr. Lee at a party before I wanted to learn Kung Fu, and let's say Mr. Lee could see I had potential for Kung Fu, he didn't come barging in and grab me by the scruff of my neck and demand that I learn Kung Fu. I would have sent him to prison. No, this is the point now. My mother, this is the real point I'm getting at. My mother might have seen that I could have made a good cake, But she did not force me, and because I would not have done it. You can bring a horse to water, you can't make them drink. This is a really profound psychology. So she very comfortably waited for 25 years, and then finally I asked her, because I was ready. Mr. Lee, I asked him. Lama Yeshe, I asked him. Lama Zopa could see, I have karma with him. He could see he was one of my teachers, but it took me 10 years to recognize. So he left me in peace until my mind was ready and until I requested. And then he started showing me my mind. Are we communicating, people? It's not mystical, it's very practical. So the more, and this is why they use all these words like devotion, all this business, you know, but look at the word devotion. It's a lovely word. When you're very devoted to somebody, it shows it's a sweet quality. So here we're talking about a person, not just devoted to your child or devoted to your husband, but devoted to a spiritual teacher. Why? The only reason is because you want to become like them. That's the answer to Hillary's question. Try and think of becoming the best cook on the planet without having a real human cook in front of you. I mean, this is so logical. The power of the human presence, of that mind there, having those qualities, being a rigsin, a knowledge holder, is so evident, you know. I mean, anybody who just you can read the Dalai Lama's books. There's no question the benefit's incredible. You go to one class in person with Dalai Lama. You even watch him online. You feel like the real person is there, you know. So the power of that human presence, the power of their words is so marvelous. It's evident that we need that to awaken, to trigger that in our heart, you know. I mean, Lama Yeshe would say, we're all dying for love. I mean, it's so true, you know, because here we are with our ego, all separate and lonely and bereft and lost and miserable and fear-based and distressed and attached and angry and dissatisfied. This is the nature of ego, you know. And then we feel separate from everybody. I mean, we feel separate from everybody. This is our sadness because we don't know how to nourish ourselves. So you're using the person you have decided is the Buddha to kind of wake yourself up to become your own person. And in the end, when you're Buddha, you're going to have a connection with every being in the universe, you know. So we're using this person whom we have chosen is the Buddha for us to help us, you know, whom we have confidence has love for us, wants us to be happy, doesn't want us to suffer, and has the means to show us how. You've got to trust that. And this is why you've got to study the teachings, because this is the logic of the teachings. Then that's a stupendous person to have in your life, you know. Because normally we're so untrusting, we're so cynical, we hold back, we don't open our heart. And then we're so naive. When we do open our heart, we open our heart to peanuts, you know. We chuck our heart to some garbage dump person and then wonder why we get hurt. So we've got to choose. I mean, Pabonka Rinpoche says, this is my favorite line in his entire book. Choose your guru very carefully because you're going to end up like them. I think that's delicious, you know. So it's such a practical thing. But of course, if you read 14th century Tibetan literature, it's going to sound like hellfire and brimstone, you know, and we've got to put it into our own terms, right? Here it is a real psychological thing. It just makes sense. So if you're going to give your heart to anybody, check on the person and check on, you know, and make sure they're valid. Then they're worthy of your heart. I mean that even when it comes to choosing a guru. I chose Lama Yeshe. I chose carefully. I watched him for 2 months and took me another 6 months to process it, you know. Took me 10 years to recognize Lama Zopa. Then the work starts. Then you do your practice every day. You do your Chenrezig practice every day. You do your Buddha practice every day. You do your Tara practice. And that's where you train yourself. That's where you do your training every day. When you visualize Chenrezig, you think of them as your Lama, the person you love. I mean, when you're playing Bach, you're not just thinking of Bach. You're thinking of your teacher. You want to become like that person. This is so healthy. But you've got to choose the right person, please. Don't choose idiots. It's just so logical, you know. And Lama Yeshe, he passed away off this planet 35 years ago, but I still think of him in the present tense, right? He's in my heart. And I mean, this is a sincere thing. Are we communicating, people? Good. We've all got a human heart. We're all dying for love. So choose the right people, please. Then open our heart and learn to nourish our heart. And that's the method from becoming our own person. By practicing Bach, you become your Bach, you know. So you have your love for Bach, for your teacher. Your heart opens. You want to please them. And that's your method for hearing the instructions properly and then practicing it. It just kind of makes sense psychologically, you know. What other questions are there? Are there any? This is especially emphasized in Tantra, of course. I mean, it's that very much, you know. Are there any questions? Yes, Jamie.
Thanks, Venerable. Can I just check in terms of the empowerment that the Dalai Lama gave on YouTube, the Chenrezig empowerment? Yes. That was 1,000-arm Chenrezig, right?
I think it was.
So in terms of what we're talking about today, that's a completely distinct thing to...
Okay, I understand. There are many, many, many emanations, different aspects of the Buddha. So Chenrezig has many different aspects. So it's obviously, from one point of view, is exactly the same as four-arm Chenrezig or any other. It's just that there's different ways of presenting, different ways of practicing. And if you take the empowerment to the 1,000-arm, there will be if you take the sadhana, there'll be a particular practice, a particular visualization, and you would do that one. And then if you take the empowerment to this one we're discussing, it's a completely different aspect. You visualize the guru, you visualize Chenrezig at the heart. So they've all got their own style. Of course, they're different. They're different practices. And so you would treat, and if you were teaching on that practice, you would teach precisely. In the end, Chenrezig is Chenrezig is Chenrezig, but they're different, they're variations on the theme, basically. Does that answer the question? Are you clear what I'm saying? Or you still not quite clear with the point?
No, and and earlier you were saying, but it's cool to do this without empowerment. So you can only do that other, you can do specifically 1,000-arm Chenrezig.
No, there are different practices. These ones in Kriya Tantra, and I think that one is also Kriya Tantra, the one is Holiness gave, the one that, you know, in online. That's also Kriya Tantra. No, wait a minute, I'm a bit confused. There's some, okay, there's some too they call, okay. There's different kinds of practices, and some you need the empowerment. In general, any empowerment, any practice in Tantra, you need to have the empowerment in order to see yourself in the form of the deity. But you can do all the other things, you know. You can do the practice, you can visualize, you can absorb into your heart, you can say the mantras, you can identify with, you can do it every day. But the empowerment gives particular, because in the end, the most advanced practices, the methods for becoming enlightened, we actually, once you know, you have the Buddha, roughly speaking, you have the Buddha out there, then you absorb inside you, and then you go through this meditation where you go through the practice of transforming your mind into those three different bodies of the Buddha. You know, it's quite technical. And so then you manifest eventually out of that, and this is rooted in emptiness, then you manifest as the Buddha. So it's training in seeing yourself being ordinary, dissolving the guru into you, the Buddha into you, and then practicing certain practice, and then you manifest in your own mind, you decide you are the Buddha. And this is actually a method for eventually actually becoming the Buddha. Are we communicating, Jamie?
Thank you. So we cannot manifest as four-arm Chenrezig with that empowerment from the Dalai.
No, you wouldn't do that. You just wouldn't do it. No, you wouldn't do that.
You wouldn't, but you can.
You need to have empowerment into each practice, even though they're similar. So there's different versions of Tara, for example. You need to do, if you've got empowerment into one, you have permission to see yourself as that Buddha. Even though, you know, I mean, yes, there's a bit of confusion about this, but I've checked recently with the Lama. I'll go and check my notes again, but that's pretty certain. You have empowerment, you have permission to see yourself as that aspect, not others. I should have checked on this before we started, but I'll check on it, and then, yeah, I'll check on it and let you know if there's a difference what I said.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? The point of all these teachings, hang on, Matthew. The point of the teachings in the first scope, the second scope, the high school, the junior school, the university, postgraduate, whatever you like, they're all just different levels of practices and teachings that lead us to becoming our own Buddha. That's it. That's it, you know, that's it. Everything there, every practice, every method, every mantra, every technique is part of the process of our slowly lessening our delusions and becoming our own Buddha. That's it, you know. Yes, Matthew.
So am I correct in that along those lines, for the highest yoga tantra is that there's a prerequisite of a direct realization, some direct realization of emptiness?
No, not at all. None of us would take empowerment if we didn't have that, if we waited for that. I mean, you could argue nothing will happen until we have a direct realization, but we're allowed to attend and receive an empowerment in the highest yoga tantra, but depending on the prerequisite the Lama would request. That's why the bare minimum Tsongkhapa is at least an appreciation of the three principal aspects of the path. But to wait until you got a direct realization before you attend an empowerment and say it and do it and practice it every day, no. But an understanding of, I mean, because the fact is, Tantra is a complete load of total nonsense if we don't understand the principle of nothing having intrinsic nature. If we see things very set in stone and very concrete, the concept of turning into some green lady with several arms or some heavy-duty dude with 1,000 arms just sounds complete hilarious nonsense. So unless we understand, the understanding of Tantra is totally contingent upon understanding emptiness. The energy that compels us to do it is bodhicitta. That's the cause of enlightenment. But the cause of getting the wisdom, the ability to transform ourselves into a Buddha is to do with emptiness. So yeah, but at least an appreciation and understanding of it, Matthew. Do you understand? Yeah, good. I mean, as Lama Zopa says, these practices are so stupendous, and I'm just paraphrasing here, that, don't have any expectation, most of us, that we're going to get any actual realizations in this life. But I mean, taking these empowerments and doing these practices and keeping our vows and word of honor is the cause for being able to in the future, We're setting ourselves up with all the right tools. What else, people? These are all such good, important topics, It always seems so confusing to us. Nothing else. So maybe we should talk about emptiness then. If the understanding of how come ordinary kind of, fat Australian nun can turn into some male white deity with 4 hands, sounds peculiar. We've got to understand emptiness, We've got to understand emptiness. It's fundamental. And the essence here, the essence of what emptiness is saying is that nothing's set in stone. I mean, it's such a wonderful saying we learn from our mummies, Nothing's set in stone. It's such a powerful statement. Nothing's set in stone. Also, another way of seeing emptiness, what is another saying we have? You don't live on an island. What is it? What do we say? What's that saying? You don't live on an island. You're not an island. What is the saying? Does anybody know?
No man's an island.
No man's an island.
Yeah, there you go. That means isolated, doesn't it? We're interdependent. So both of those are the aspects of what emptiness refers to. We're not living in isolation. Nothing exists in isolation. Another way to say it, it's another way to put it. Nothing is existing in and of itself. Nothing exists as an island. Nothing is set in stone. There's a nice, wonderful ways of saying that things have no intrinsic nature, which is the way they say it in Buddhism. I mean, His Holiness one time was asked, how do I put emptiness into practice in daily life? And it was so simple. He said, see something from another point of view. See something from another point of view. So that's why, I mean, I remember, it was wonderful. I read recently, yesterday on the New York Times, there's a story about one Israeli and one Palestinian, both Israelis, but one Jew, one Arab. And they've made some wrapped together. So they're sitting, it's so wonderful, this method is so gorgeous. They're sitting at a table, and the first one is the Jew, and he shouts like in rap, heavy duty, punk rap, whatever words you want, shouting all the things that the Jews feel about the horrible Arabs, and the Arab's sitting there listening. Then the Arab has his turn, and he shouts every possible abuse you could have about the Jews. It's blown people's minds because they're speaking the truth, They're speaking the truth. So they're each, and then slowly they can see it from another point of view. They've been lining up for meetings and people are begging them to come and give conferences. You have a fight with somebody, and you're convinced you are right. You are absolutely convinced that what you're seeing is true. Then you have enough courage to hear what the other person says. And you have enough courage to hear, well, maybe they're right. Then straight away there's space. So that's compassion. But oh my God, that is emptiness, Because the consequence of seeing that things are set in stone, that's what Buddha means by ignorance. That's exactly what he means, this root ignorance. The root ignorance that doesn't understand interdependence, that believes this is how things are. That's what fundamentalism is. That's what, and we're all got fundamentalism. Look at us when we're having arguments with our sister or something. You see things a certain way, and then you have those glasses on, and all you see is your view, but we don't see that it's our view. I mean, this is the way the mind works, and we can see this, you know, it's so powerful. And that, especially when it comes to ourselves, this is the point in Tantra, and this is what Lama Yeshe kept trying to get us to see, you know, he was so kind. We have got delusions. We are deluded. We are deluded. We do have delusions. But it's not the only story. But all we see is our own delusions. The person we hate most, the person we see mostly as set in stone, the person we are fixated as, you know, on seeing only the bad qualities of is ourself. It's the terrible irony of ego, you know. So we are right, there are delusions there. But it's not the only thing. And with Tantra, what we're trying to do is have the courage and the humility, actually, to point out our good qualities, to point out our virtues, and to sort of like, it's like you're playing a role in a movie. You're learning to act those qualities. That's what it means, divine pride. That's why you would want to do a Tara practice, why you would want to do a Chenrezig practice. You're training yourself in becoming that. You're reprogramming yourself. So and by doing that, that's a powerful antidote to the delusions. So in other words, there are different approaches to getting rid of delusions in your mind. The very first one is watch your body and speech like a hawk. Then you start to look at the delusions and dig deep in your own shit. Then you start to add compassion to the mix. And now you start to add this divine pride. I mean, one approach in Tantra, the way they talk about it, like I mentioned before, we are deluded, but you're lifting your game and you're identifying yourself as your potential. This is what they mean by positive thinking, positive psychology, you know. I mean, Tantra is exactly that. So and then you learn to become that. You learn to, even if you haven't done an empowerment, you have the idea of what Chenrezig is, then you learn to act like that in daily life. You learn to show yourself to others in a nice aspect. You control your speech. The words you say are only kind words. The way you behave is kind behavior. That's becoming Chenrezig. What the hell else do you think it means? Don't make it esoteric, you know. But we need to see those parts of ourselves, and that's what's happening in Tantra. That's why it can be such a powerful antidote and can help our minds calm down and be so less obsessive about our negativity. Yes, the negativity is there, but like I said, your garden's got not just got weeds, it's got so much potential. And when you know botany, even though you can't see even the evidence of the flowers yet, you know the potential for the flowers is there. So you lift up your mind, you're not so freaked out. But if we're so set in stone, so fundamentalist, oh my God, I'm a disaster. Oh my God, I'm so shocking. Every second I'm negative. I'm going to go to hell realms for 22 eons. I'm so negative. It can sound so virtuous. And it is, because you really have got a good mind and you're seeing your negativity. But we've got to also see the positive and then encourage the positive, grow it. And that's what we're trying to do with Tantra. Psychologically, it's so brilliant, you know, but it demands courage and intelligence because we wear our hearts on our sleeves. I mean, we just vomit all our misery out because we can't hold it internally. But knowing you've got the potential to be Tara, Chenrezig, all these Buddhas, and if we're talking about the mind here, you know, then you practice those parts of yourself. You train yourself, and then eventually adding bodhicitta to the mix. When you meet other people, you don't just vomit out, you don't just expose who you are, all your nakedness and your misery, and you wear your heart on your sleeve. You present yourself in a way that's suitable for that person. You could be having a struggle in your mind. Your husband could have left you yesterday. But you might meet a person who hasn't seen you for 10 years. Hello, Rabina, how are you? You'll say, I'm very well, thank you. How are you? You won't vomit out your heart because you're working on your mind. You're knowing who you are, and you're able to hold your own emotions. You know your delusions, and you know your virtue. You know your goodness. You know your good qualities, and you're growing them. You're enhancing them. You're showing them. You're presenting them to others, you know. It's such powerful practice. Psychologically, Tantra is just brilliant. You mightn't see that because it's so esoteric and so ancient and Indian and Tibetan, you know, in the way they talk. But it's just brilliant, sophisticated psychology. We can try and get past all the labels, you know. And it's rooted in emptiness, that you do not have an intrinsic nature of negativity, that your nature actually is the positivity. This is something we need to understand when we just study Buddhist psychology in the second scope. The delusions are adventitious. They're not at the core of our being. They're not intrinsic in our nature. They're not integral to who we are. These are not just some empty words. These are so profound, you know. So they talk about in Tantra that as a result of not having, as a result of not understanding emptiness, as a result of not understanding dependent arising, as a result of believing that things have an intrinsic nature just instinctively, we don't realize we do. As a result of this, one of the consequences is we have a very mundane view of the world. So the particular approach in Tantra is understanding emptiness brings us also the view that enables us to lift ourselves, to have this blissful view of ourselves, to identify ourselves as a deity, as the Buddha. It's super powerful, super atomic bomb on the delusions, you know. We have to practice it, and it takes courage because we're so addicted to our misery. Thinking that you are the deity doesn't mean you don't see your delusions still. It's just that you're not fixating on them because your mind's got more space, because you understand emptiness, understand dependent arising, you know. So in ordinary daily life, I mean, we can see how the delusions in the mind, you don't need to conjure them. We don't need to think negative thoughts. They just come flying up, don't they? So the first step we need to practice, well, first is to identify them, but then not to buy into them. This is a really fundamental practice. And what that means is, it's like, the best example is you've got a bunch of next door neighbors. You've got 100 crazy next door neighbors. We've got 100 next door neighbors, and they're all shouting. So our first job is to identify all the different voices. What is each of those 100 people saying? And we're going to identify that a lot of them, one is attachment, one is anger, one is jealousy, one is anxiety. But there's going to be in that mob, there's going to be a kind voice, a loving voice, a compassionate voice. And you've got to listen to both of them and then identify. And then the thing is, we've got to then just learn to distinguish what these thoughts are saying. So we've got to identify what attachment says. What does anger say? What does jealousy say? What does love say? What does patience say? Because they're all concepts. And then we have to realize that the attachment voice has no valid basis. The attachment, which is the emotional hunger for that chocolate cake, is not a valid thought, because the cake it's seeing and the cake that exists, the cake that attachment is seeing and the cake that exists are two different things. But the loving voice, the person who's saying loving words, oh, she's a really nice person, thank you so much for your kindness. And you hear that and you go, that's a valid thought. Why is it valid? Because it's rooted in dependent arising. The delusions are not rooted in dependent arising. They've got these, they're set in stone voice. They're set in stone views, and they're exaggerations and distortions. So they're not valid for this reason. So they're looming large in our head because they're just uncontrolled, because we haven't controlled them. So we have to listen to what they're saying, and then we have to stop believing them. Let them still shout. Don't worry, can't push them away yet. They're all been there for a while, but you don't believe what they're saying. So the voice that says, oh my God, I'm a disaster. I'm going to get hell for 22 eons. Every word I'm saying is no good. I'm a disaster. I'm negative. I can't do this. I can't do that. They are distorted exaggerations. The key function of delusions is they exaggerate. The key function of virtues is that they're reasonable. So what's a reasonable? So how would you argue with, if you wanted to have a discussion with that roommate, that next door neighbor? Then which part of you would argue with self-hate? It would be virtue. Well, Rabina, it's okay. There are delusions there. I agree, Rabina. There are delusions in your mind, but at the moment, the aversion in you is exaggerating them, or the instinct of fear and anxiety, which is coming from attachment, is exaggerating your bad qualities. So yes, there are bad qualities there, but Rabina, and this is your virtue talking, not Rabina talking, the virtue. The virtuous thought is a wise, reasonable thought that argues with it and calms it down. And then you practice that virtuous thought, then that's the one that begins to that begins to run the show in the head, you know. This is taking time because we don't like our negative thoughts. They freak us out. So we've got to have courage to listen to them, not to give them power, And giving them power means they're right. And this is what we all do now. The ignorance of the world is so unbearable. Look at all the internet and all the conspiracy theories. Everything anybody ever reads on anything online, we're going to believe it because our minds are so lacking in wisdom, you know. We'll believe anything. Just it's absolutely shocking. We've got to use our intelligence to listen to the voices, to hear the thought, identify which delusion it is, and then use the opposite to argue with it. This, of course, is tiring. This is practice. And then eventually, as we're adding more compassion to the mix, and then we add the tantric approach, which is we identify more and more with our virtues, with our goodness. We enhance those. We lift ourselves up. We identify ourselves as those. We develop this divine pride of being the Buddha, you know. When you eventually have taken an empowerment and you've taken the tantric vows, we have a vow to remember all the time that I am Chenrezig. Everybody else out there is Chenrezig. All sounds are Chenrezig's mantra. The entire world is Chenrezig's pure land. It's forcing our mind to lift up, you know. Of course, it's hard work. This is practice. To identify with our potential. Bringing the future result into the present is how they say it. It's like anybody. I remember one time the Australian Open in Melbourne years ago, the tennis. And I think the camera homed in on Serena sitting when they have a break between sets. And there was Serena. It looked like she was reading her positive thoughts, you know. Somehow it's like in other words, anybody who's using positive psychology, you imagine the end result. You imagine you're winning the tennis. You imagine this, you imagine that. But we all do that every day. You know, when you have to go down to the shops for your ice cream, you imagine the route to get there because you know the route. And that gets you there. That gets you there. You imagine your chocolate ice cream. That gets you to ask for it. So we're using our creative imagination, but in an intelligent, appropriate way, you know. But we have to practice it because delusions have the tendency to loom large and they're the old habit. So we've got to consciously, actively have these positive thoughts. Give them power. Anybody else got something to say? Ask. What time is it? 2:20. What else, people? No questions. So let's talk more. I mean, maybe we can talk more about emptiness. Let's try and see how it's true. I mean, try and keep it simple, but how is it true? The things aren't set in stone. Things don't have an intrinsic nature. The things exist interdependently. There's two different aspects of there. Things exist interdependently, which means things don't have an intrinsic nature. So this view we understand in general, it's a view that's common in the world. But the Buddhist approach takes it to a very, very, I'd suggest, very subtle degree of understanding, you know. And the understanding of this, to this, as Matthew pointed out, the direct realization of emptiness in the subtlety of meditation, we can only finally get it then. That's when the major shift happens in the mind. So why should we? What is the advantage to us? What is the advantage to us of seeing things interdependently? What is the advantage to us of seeing that things aren't set in stone? Well, right here, in terms of Tantra, in terms of this practice, if we can just imagine, if we can kind of understand what the psychology of what Chenrezig is. It's just a visual form. We are creatures of form, you know, so we need things in form. It's like we need things to be externalized. It helps us. But the external, the shape of Chenrezig or the letters of a word are just the indicator, aren't they, of what we're trying to cultivate in the mind. The mind is finally the point. But we need the external because we're external creatures right now. We're formal. We've got shape and form, you know. So the mind that is less grasping, which another way of putting less set in stone. Okay, the Buddha's saying, and this is where it's so simple, we can't join the dots, it seems too simple. When he talks, the most fundamental teaching in karma, the very first level of practice, is that everything we think and do and say that's based on a delusion, just naturally right now is suffering, right now is painful. Well, we can prove that. Check the last time you were jealous, angry, anxious, depressed. It's so obvious that right there, its character is painful, So then, of course, what Buddha's saying is what we do with our body and speech on the basis of those, because that state of mind is distorted, because it's totally I-based, and this is the characteristic of the delusions, they're totally I-based. And this, of course, sounds cruel to us because we think, well, I'm me, I'm allowed to be me. What do you mean they're I-based? Is there something wrong with me? Well, the way we grasp at the me, and this is the root, this is the root function. Okay, there's many functions of all the delusions, the neuroses, the delusions, the misconceptions, deep in the bones of our being, which are the source of our suffering now, and the source of what we do with our body and speech that harm others, which then sows seeds in our mind, which become the source of our own future suffering. Then everything we think and do and say that's rooted in a virtue, then it sows a seed in the mind that right now causes a happy feeling, and that will sow seeds in the mind that will ripen as our future happiness. This is technically what Buddha's saying, but of course, because we're so used to hearing it as punishment and reward, we hear it as kind of punitive and heavy, It's totally wrong. It's like working out that sugar causes diabetes and this one causes a healthy body. It's just practical, So the thing to get, and this is in the middle scope, high school, forget about the Bodhisattva path, forget about Tantra. When we identify our states of mind, we can see the pain, the suffering, the mental suffering of the delusions. So the extent to which we have attachment, anger, anxiety, depression, jealousy, is the extent to which we're miserable. It's so simple, it's embarrassing. But because we're so addicted to believing, yes, I'm miserable, but look who's causing it. Him and her and it and that and they. We're addicted to the external thing that we are convinced is the source of the pain. No. Buddha's point is so direct, it's so shocking that the state of mind itself is the source of the pain. So this becomes a powerful, energizer for us to want to stop suffering, to want to change our thoughts, to cultivate the positive thoughts, Because the positive thoughts. So this is the point about reality, and this is getting to emptiness. Ego grasping is the name of the root delusion, called simply ignorance. It's known colloquially as ego grasping when its object is I. So ignorance, ma rigpa in Tibetan, unawareness. It's a very specific ignorance in our mind. This is how they talk in Buddhist psychology. It's a very primordial view deep in the bones of our being that believes utterly and totally and absolutely and completely that there is a real intrinsic me in here somewhere. Totally programmed in us. And the voices of that ego grasping, of that particular ignorance, the main voice of that ego grasping, that primordial panic-stricken, fear-based sense of a separate, bereft, lonely, concrete, set in stone me, the main voice of that is this bottomless pit of attachment, this massive emotional hunger, this powerful feeling that I am not enough, do not have enough, did not achieve enough, am not beautiful enough, or whatever it might be. It's its default assumption. The default assumption of attachment is dissatisfaction, not enough. And the way we express it in our culture, in particular, as Lama Zopa says, it's the main suffering in the West, is as not just I haven't got enough, not just that my boyfriend doesn't love me enough, but that I am not enough. This is the deep self-loathing we have. This is absolutely heartbreaking. And we believe it. And we believe it. So that gives rise to this this is the attachment. And then the other function of attachment is this: because we don't think we are enough or have enough or whatever, then it gives rise to hankering, yearning for something we convinced is missing, you know. And then this gives rise to aversion, anger, depression, panic, anxiety, irritation, annoyance, upset, a whole spectrum, when attachment doesn't get what it wants. And it can't get what it wants because it's a lie. So we're living like a nightmare between this attachment and aversion, and each of them growing more. So we have to unpack and unravel these delusions, you know. And then they give rise to all the other ones. So then alongside that, in our mind, we have access to our virtues. These are our saving grace, you know. This is the miracle of our human mind. We have access to kindness, intelligence, virtue, good ethics, wanting not to live, not to steal, not to lie, not to rape, not to harm. But we don't pay attention to them. We don't even acknowledge that they're there. This is the absolutely heartbreaking thing. If we want to compare ourselves without arrogance to the rest of the world, excuse me, please forgive me, don't think you're being special. But you are special if you have even one thought to want to be ethical. This is like a miracle. I mean, in our culture, psychologically, we don't even discuss ethics. It just sounds peculiar. But if you've got ethics, if you want to be a better person, if you want to be kind and loving and wise and compassionate, that is an utter miracle on this planet. And that is every reason to be delighted with yourself. They're the flowers within you. They're the potential within you that should give you such pleasure and such joy. But we are addicted to the negative. This is the tragedy, you know. They loom large for us. So one way of talking about Tantra then is to cultivate. It sounds so silly. It just sounds so weird to us. We have to cultivate the virtues and therefore see those as who I am, and then learn to delight in that, to practice positive, optimistic, self-respectful, joyful thoughts. One is not enough. You've got to practice it, you know. So in other words, the more you identify yourself as virtuous, the more you identify yourself as Tara or Chenrezig, the more joyful you will logically and naturally become. This is the psychology of Tantra. It's very brilliant. But it takes time, like anything. It's not just once you do it and get an exciting feeling. And it's a powerful antidote to the delusions. So there's two ways of working on the delusions. One is to put your hands in the shit and work on them. The other one is to grow the virtue. Both have a function, you know. And then to have a sense of, and then you add bodhicitta to the mix. And that means you have some sense of your body and speech as being of benefit to others. You know, you're there for others. But of course, we have to know where we're at. If we're having a difficult time and can't handle being around other people, then keep away from other people. Stick to yourself. Absolutely. Work on your mind, you know. And then when we're ready, we can put ourselves with other people and we can be there for others. That's huge. I always quote Grace Kelly. I love this. She said, of course I have to look beautiful. People have to look at me. That's amazing. I love that. Absolutely adore that. And there's Marilyn, whom everybody worshipped, but she thought she was a shit. Look at the difference. She was supposedly gorgeous. I can't keep my eyes off Marilyn Monroe, you know. But she had this the view of being nothing. The view of being nothing. She never thought once, I must look nice for other people. All she thought of us was herself day and night, you know. Well, it looks like, isn't it? Anyway, 2:30. I've got the clock out here. The church rings bells. More questions, you people. Come on. More questions. Yes, Matthew.
So your explanation of using the visualizations as a means for, you know, lifting the mind up.
Yes.
Can you, along those lines, can you speak to purification practices and how they function? You know, Vajrasattva or 35 Buddhas in particular.
Okay, I understand. Well, there's two parts to that all. There's the fundamental point about the way karma works, which is that everything you think and say, forget about saying and doing. Everything you think You sow seeds or you program your mind. So every time you say to yourself, oh, look at that anger in my mind. So ridiculous, Matthew. Shut up. I'm so sorry. You say to yourself, I really regret that anger. That was so ridiculous. I can't stand the suffering of that. And you really think about it. And then you think of compassion for the person you just were angry with, and you decide you're not going to be angry again. Well, what do you think you've done to your mind? That's what purification is. It's a fundamental natural process of reprogramming your mind, because that's the nature of karma. You get that point? Do you get that point? That's the fundamental point. So, like all of these, it's formalized as a practice, and they're formalized as a practice in conjunction with Buddhas. So this is the key point that, you know, you're going to really hear in the Mahayana path, but especially in the Vajrayana, which is the Tibetan. That you can sit there and have this very powerful regret of the negativity, which is a negative thought that you just and you change it. This is stupendous. This is stupendous, you know. But if you do it and you combine that practice, as we would do, let's say, with the practice of Vajrasattva, the essential points, psychologically, the first step is regret. I acknowledge I said those angry words. What a drag. I really regret that, because I know that I don't want the future suffering. Regret's like compassion for yourself. Then next you think, well, next you think, well, I'm going to have compassion for the person I just angry with. And then you could say, do a little kind of contemplation about it. And then fourth, which is the remedy. And then fourth is the resolve. You can decide, I must not do that again. They're the four components of purification: regret, compassion, the remedy, and then the determination to change. Now, you take those, and that's already powerful, but all the Tibetans would say, the Vajrayanas would say, if you combine that with the visualization of the Buddha, whom you take refuge in, and then the third step, when you do the remedy, you visualize different things, nectar coming, and you say the mantra of Vajrasattva. All the lamas would tell us that the power, because of the power of enlightened beings, literally meaning powerful beings, they're powerful, that any practice you do that brings in the Buddhas is like 1 billion times stronger than any practice you do without the Buddha. So when we can understand that, then we don't lose the 4 steps. The real practice is the 4 steps, but you're bringing the Buddha into it, and you're using the mantra. So that makes it a much more powerful practice. But the fundamentals of it is simply the logic of karma, that every thought you have, so the more you regret your anger, the more you have compassion, the more you determine not to do it again. Guess what? That's like you're just playing the wrong game. You just did your backhand wrong. Oh, I absolutely did that. It was completely ridiculous. I want to play proper backhand. You rely upon Federer. You're definitely not going to do it again. Guess what? You're going to play a better backhand. It's just the mind. It's the power of the mind. But you add Buddha to the mix. Same with the 35 Buddhas. And that practice adds another component, because you're using your body if you do the prostrations. So we create negative karma with our body. We create negative karma with our speech and with our mind. So something like the 35 Buddhas, you're purifying all 3 aspects, utilizing, again, the Buddha and saying the names. I mean, we've got to think about those parts, because they can just sound like religious, but there's a logic to it if we think about it. You with me, Matthew? Yeah? Okay. And of course, all these practices, are rooted in bodhicitta. The reason you do them is for the compassion for others, and they're rooted in emptiness, because the final purification is when we've realized emptiness. When you've got a direct insight into emptiness, cut the root. That second is when you cut the root of that ignorance. And that ignorance no longer has power. If you've cut the root, then from that second you become a superior being. From that second you become an Arya being. And from that second you start to climb out of your samsara into your nirvana. And from that second you can't fall back. So the final purification is when you've realized emptiness. And that's why always Lama Zopa, when he does the purification practice, he always gets us to contemplate the emptiness of the negativity at the end of the practice, because it's so powerful. Because negativity is also empty. And that's why we can really understand that'll loosen the grip of the fear of ego grasping. When we think we're so bad, I'm naughty, I'm wrong, I'm going to hell for 42 eons, I'm so negative. When you realize that there's no intrinsic I, there's no intrinsic negative, and there's no intrinsic negative karma, and there's no intrinsic action, then suddenly it doesn't mean there's no negativity, but it loosens the grip of the fears that we tend to have, Do you understand, Matthew? Thank you, sweetheart. What else, people? 236. What can we do then? What's useful today? Now, I think the thing I'm talking about is really the essence of these practices. The psychology of Tantra is to lift your game, to see yourself as transcendental, to identify with your future. And it's utilizing the visualization of these idealized beings, the manifestation of the qualities that you want to become, to enable you to become it. This is the purpose of it, you know. And because it, and also it naturally, and this is the thing, this is where this concept of divine pride, you know, is where you are identifying yourself, not in terms of your delusions, you know they're there, but you are delighted by your good qualities. You are delighted by your potential Chenrezig, your potential Tara, and it gives you joy. And that's a powerful method for becoming it, you know. But it's almost like if we're too caught up in the negativity, we're too scared to think, I could be Tara. No, 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 not possible. No, no, I couldn't be Chenrezig. I mean, when we're so negative, we are addicted to that identity. And that's the tragedy. And that's when it's set in stone. There's no emptiness there. There's no dependent arising there, you know. And another way to talk about emptiness is because when the negativities arise, when the negative thoughts arise, because we're so fearful of them, we're so freaked out. This is why either in our world, one aspect, one type of person will vomit out all the negativity and punch everybody else. But another person, because we're so fearful, will try and just push it all away because we can't bear the pain, you know. So the approach we have to take, and this is applying emptiness, is yes, there is anger there. And then the thing is, because the fear is so enormous, fear is a function of ego grasping, fear is the character of ego grasping, then fear is just panic stricken. But as soon as you walk into that angry thought and you identify it and analyze it and look this way and look that way, the soon as you do that, it dissipates. Because fear comes when you're seeing it as set in stone and you can't stand it. That's how we live our lives. This is why we all go crazy. So if we can walk into it, if we can walk into that anger, into that thought and analyze each piece, then you realize you will not find any intrinsic anger. It will dissipate. That's applying dependent arising. The rain's subsided a bit here now. The trees have stopped shaking, but there's still no power. I think they've forgotten about us. Have you got power, Mary, in Tawas? Have you got power in Tawas, Mary? You have got power. Okay. Must be just Santa Fe.
We didn't last night.
On my battery, I'm down to 85%. I bought a battery. I'm so sensible, aren't I? It's down to 85%. It'll last me for a day. Anyway, people, what else, Carlene? Come on, other questions, please. There's such good points you're bringing up, all of you. What else is there to talk about? Come on. Nothing? Yes, Matthew. Good. Go for it, baby.
Can you, this is a bit of a step back, but can you mention the role of visualizing seed syllables?
I didn't mention it, did I?
You didn't, but you know, I see that in the practice as mentioned as part of the practice.
Oh, that is okay.
I've always been interested in what the role. Yeah,
I understand you. In the practices, okay, right back to when we talked about the three bodies of the Buddha, they talk about it like that, the three kayas in Sanskrit. There's the actual mind, the enlightened mind, and they call that the Dharmakaya. Try to keep it in simple, understand it simply. It's referring to the mind that's free of delusions and full of wisdom and virtue. That's the Buddha mind. That's the actual goal of everything. That's the purpose, the final goal. That's who we are finally, the mind. Pure, unmanifest, all-knowing, all-compassionate, all-pervasive mind. So then, out of compassion, you manifest in these two different bodies for the sake of sentient beings according to their capabilities. So the Nirmanakaya, like the Buddha behind me, is a form that ordinary people can see. So so in your practice, then the other form is the Sambhogakaya, the subtle light body. Okay, so now in your meditation practice, when you meditate and you do the essence of all the tantric practices in this training in becoming the Buddha, there's the Buddha outside there. Let's say we do the Chenrezig, the Buddha outside there. And then you do certain purifications, and then you bring the Buddha in and you absorb the Buddha within you. And then you imagine you completely dissolve into empty space. And then you imagine, I have now become the Dharmakaya. You become the Buddha. You visualize this. You imagine this. So everything is dissolved. All the appearances of bodies and universes have completely dissolved. And they talk about this as space-like emptiness. So there's just this space-like emptiness. And you imagine, you think this is the Dharmakaya. You're training yourself in imagining you've become the Dharmakaya. And then you're driven by compassion. You think, well, this is all very fine for me. I'm the Buddha. But what about poor old sentient beings? Why have I worked so hard to become the Buddha? Is so I can benefit sentient beings. So the next one you do, you now want to manifest in the next one, which is the Sambhogakaya, the subtle one. So that would be the subtle light body of Chenrezig. But because in the meditation you're just visualizing the Nirmanakaya is actually the deity's body. But the Sambhogakaya is represented by the seed syllable, which is the essence of the mantra. And the mantra of a Buddha is just a manifestation of the Buddha, but in sound, that's all. So the essence of that is what they call the seed syllable. So it represents the Sambhogakaya. I don't know, Matthew, does that help?
How come it took me so long to hear this lecture?
I don't know, don't ask me, baby.
I need you on speed dial.
Oh, okay. I think you'd be exhausted if you did have. You have to be just 3 minutes a day would do.
Thank you.
And yeah, that's why. So you visualize, you manifest as a seed symbol, and then out of this, you manifest as the Nirmanakaya. So you're training yourself in becoming a Buddha, training until one day, eventually, it happens. Just like you're training all day, like Simone Biles. I've been watching her documentary on, well, not on Facebook. I can't get onto Facebook. I never know my damn password. But anyway, and she's like this, you know, she practices 47 hours in the gym, and now she's at the Olympics doing her 47 flips and ups and downs. So she trains it and then she does it. That's how things work. You train in your mind and then you become it. But we don't trust that process when it comes to spiritual qualities. We trust that process when it comes to becoming a gymnast and a tennis player. But when it comes to being virtuous and kind, we have a panic attack. But it's exactly the same. So we have to practice being, Lama Yeshe says, you've got to practice being content. This sounds so bizarre to us, we can't believe it. What do you mean practice being content? So because we're so convinced the cake and the boyfriend, do you mean I've got to go search for another cake? No, you've got to practice having a content thought. So discontent is I'm not enough. So how do you argue with that? Duh, I am enough. Really? You don't believe it in the beginning, but you got to start it. You got to start with somewhere. You got to start with a thought, you know. And so we practice, and then we see, if we see ourselves as a deity, and you're going to go shopping, just go down the street. You got to go shopping for your ice cream or something, you know, for your burrito. Have an awareness that you're going to be on that street, and other people will see you. They mightn't look at you very much, but some people are going to see you. So, you know, why not look nice? Why go down in your pajamas and smelly and burping at people? No, it's very rude. Look nice for their sake. I mean, it sounds almost silly for us, you know. We think, oh, I can dress what I like. Well, you can. But if you're thinking of being like a bodhisattva, you'd be what is appropriate for sentient beings. So if you're going to be going to a rap concert, you don't dress like, you know, Queen Elizabeth. You dress like a rap person. Depends on sentient beings. You be what they need. You have that consciousness. But we can't do that if we haven't become our own self, can we? It's schizophrenic. We wouldn't know what to do. So first the divine pride is for your own sake. And then you present yourself to others for their sake, you know. It's really just practical psychology. Got to unpack it. So important, you know. Come on, people, what else? You have to ask me some questions.
Venerable Rabina, there's a
Yes,
question from Bob, and
Good.
he typed a question here, so I'll read it.
Good, good.
Venerable, would it be correct to suspect that realizing emptiness is fundamentally realizing the emptiness of emptiness, which
No. Realizing emptiness is realizing the emptiness of everything. Emptiness itself is just one thing you realize the emptiness of. That's not the final one, not at all. No. The real, you want to say it that way because you just got to remember. See, we have because of ego grasping, because of this mistake in the mind, because of this ignorance that clings to things as having an intrinsic nature, we instinctively feel that some things must have an intrinsic nature. And that's really the way Buddha argues with the view of a creator, the view of this. I mean, the Greeks call it an essence, you know, or an intrinsic self, or a being that is intrinsic, like a creator. And that's a very common thing among people. I remember a friend of mine who's a Buddhist said it took her years to try to get past the view that somehow there's got to be something that's different and above everything else, that somehow isn't just dependent arising. So if we say that everything is dependent arising, including a Buddha, it sort of seems to make the Buddha less. We want to have something that's up there, that's intrinsic, set in stone, that in its nature is self-existent. We have a deep impulse to think that. And it's shocking. It seems to diminish something if we think of it as a dependent arising, which is really why if you had a discussion, like, I mean, you know, if you have a discussion with a very devoted Muslim or Christian, it's the most shocking concept is that everybody can become a Buddha. That's like saying everyone can be ordinary, or no, even more shocking, that God was ordinary once and is now God. That is a literal impossibility. That is the worst, most shocking concept. And that's what Buddha's arguing with, and it sounds very shocking. That anybody, the difference is that Christianity says there's a being called God who is all-knowing, all-compassionate, and all-wise, and all-powerful. Well, they're the same qualities of a Buddha. The difference is Buddha says everybody can become that. The Christians say there is only one of that, and we have to keep that separate. That's the view that, so that's a shocking concept. I forget what the question was, but Bob's point. Oh, so therefore, everything that exists, including the Buddha, is empty of intrinsic character, is empty of intrinsic nature. And it's because everything is empty of intrinsic nature that that everything can change. Why we can become a Buddha, the final logical reason for why we can become a Buddha is because our mind is empty of existing from its own side. In fact, our Buddha nature is said, our ultimate Buddha nature is the emptiness of our mind. Our mind can become a Buddha because it is empty of intrinsic existence. This is the thing we have to understand. So yes, it happens also to be that everything that does exist, Bob, as you know, everything that does exist by definition is empty of intrinsic existence. There cannot be anything that exists that doesn't have that characteristic. So if there is something that exists that's called that emptiness of intrinsic existence, that is a phenomenon. So that phenomenon, which is called the emptiness of intrinsic existence of Bob, that phenomenon is also empty. Of course it is. If it exists, it's empty. Whatever can be cognized by the mind is empty. It's just how it is. But we have this kind of block in our head that makes it seem like it kind of diminishes. There's got to be something that's intrinsic. There's got to be something we think that has to be intrinsic, has to be set in stone. And that's very much the view that Buddha's arguing with. Right, what else? Thank you, Bob. What else, darlings? Anything else? No? I should be talking more, I'm sorry, but I keep asking you people questions because the questions are so good. It brings up the points that you need to hear. Come on. Anything else? Please, I beg you people, talk to me. Any old rubbish. Mary, what? Mary Camille, you put your hand up. You didn't? Okay. Okay. What else then? I mean, I don't know what else to say. Come on, you people. Ask me some questions. So the energy that makes you want to do this, that's compassion. But the ability to, but what you need is the wisdom to remove all the rubbish. You can have bodhicitta till the cows come home, you will not get enlightened. And you can have wisdom until the cows come home and you won't get enlightened. You've got to have the two wings of the bird, you know. You've got to have two wings of the bird. And each of them helps the other. So in other words, every time you practice compassion, every time you practice reaching out to another, which is the compassion wing, guess what you do? You just put an atomic bomb under the intrinsic sense of self. Hang on a sec, Mary. Every time you practice compassion, which is the compassion wing, it puts an atomic bomb under the ignorance. It loosens the grip of ego grasping. Then every time you practice the wisdom wing and you loosen the grip of ego grasping, that just brings you closer to others. So it's clear that wisdom helps compassion and compassion helps wisdom, but you've got to have both. Yes, Mary, sweetie pie.
Thank you so much, Venerable Rabina. Could you mention either falling asleep, going to sleep, visualizing oneself as a deity, or dissolving into emptiness?
What do you mean by mention?
Could you
just
teach us, share it?
You mean you'd like to know the benefit of doing that?
Yes, please, and the process.
Okay, I mean, because you see, the greatest yogis, as Lama Zopa says, death is what they've been waiting for, okay? It sounds very shocking to us. Death is what they've been waiting for. Because the point about, in the Vajrayana, the death process is described in a very detailed way in terms of 8 stages of gradual deconstruction of the different components of the person. But now the sleep process is exactly the same. This is the understanding in the Vajrayana. It's exactly the same. So, the great yogis, one can go through the sleep process as if they were dying, because the same things happen. The same gradual process of deconstruction occurs as you go to sleep. You go from the gross sensory consciousness, the earth element ceases, the eye element, the 4 elements, the senses, the elements, and then you go to the dream mind. And then you wake up in the morning, you know, wake up. So they're the 3 stages that you go through also in your meditation, in your deity practices. So they practice in their meditation, going through these gradual 3 stages, going to the Dharmakaya, going through the dream state is the Sambhogakaya, and then waking up is the Nimanakaya. And then they do that also in their sleep. And then they're ready for death, and they can do it properly then. So practicing, imagining the 8 stages as you go to sleep, or practicing which is dissolving into emptiness, really, but quickly, and then imagining that you are, or you imagine you're dissolving as the deity, is just it's marvelous practice. It's training your mind. That's all. It's just training your mind in becoming the Buddha. That's all. I mean, Lama Zopa's book, actually. I don't know who's got highest yoga tantra practices here, but let me read you from Lama Zopa's book. We'll finish with that. I've got 5 minutes. It's very excellent. In the chapter called Death is What the Yogis Have Been Waiting For. So it'll hopefully give you inspiration to want to take an empowerment one day and to want to do these practices so that you can become a Buddha. So I'll bring Lama Zopa into Lama Yeshe. He won't mind. I'm inviting Lama Zopa into Lama Yeshe's class. Oh, where is it? Death. Here we go. Death. Here we go. Okay, I'll just read you this chapter, or some parts of it. And the purpose is to give you the inspiration to take a highest yoga tantra empowerment eventually, which means to take the tantric vows, which means to take the bodhisattva vows. So you have all the tools in your toolkit to get enlightened. Okay, people? I'll read it to you. Death is what the yogis have been waiting for. Where is it? Here we go. Okay, so generally it is not permitted to openly give details of the methods that the great yogis use. However, I feel it would be useful to talk about briefly here. This is Lama Zopa talking. Death is the moment they've been waiting for. At the point in the death process when all the grosser consciousnesses, the senses have ceased, and only the extreme, this is all the way through to the subtle, and only the extremely subtle consciousness is left. We've got gross, subtle, extremely subtle. As discussed in the last chapter, the yogis, those who have observed karma well, kept their precepts purely, spent their lives training their minds in the clear light meditation, and have been able to recognize the base-time clear light, the imagined visualized one, are now able to recognize the clear light of death. Clear light is another term for the extremely subtle consciousness, which is what turns into the Dharmakaya, what turns into the Buddha in this process. They can remain in meditation in the clear light, conjoined with emptiness, for as long as they wish. 1 hour, 3 days, many months. Some meditators stay in the clear light meditation in their hermitage for years. His Holiness the Dalai Lama's root guru, Ling Rinpoche, for example, stayed in meditation for 13 days. Lama Yeshe, too, he remained for 5 days in meditation, He was 5 days in meditation after he'd stopped breathing. There are many examples like this. Apparently, one of the previous Ganden throne holders spent some 21 days in meditation. And I remember at Buxa, this is where they first escaped to, when we escaped from Tibet, there was a Sera monastery monk in the same house that I lived in, a very simple monk who spent many days in meditation after passing away. It seems that the great 8th century Bodhisattva Shantideva spent something like 30 years in meditation after he passed away at Kopan Monastery. And anyway, by concentrating in this subtlest state. So that's, if you did the sleep process properly, you go through the 8 stages. If you do the death one, if you do your meditation, you go through these 8 stages of deconstruction, from the gross consciousness to the subtle to the very subtle, the clear light. So by concentrating in this subtlest state without distraction, some practitioners achieve enlightenment, and that means achieve the Dharmakaya, because all the delusions have gone. All the grosser appearances have finished. You've actually become conscious and stayed conscious all the way through this gradual deconstruction process until you get to the very subtle level of mind, which is the level that can become a Buddha right there. If you awake, if you're conscious, and that's what we're not. We've slept and died countless millions of times, but we don't notice. They actually realize the 3 bodies of a Buddha. They transform ordinary death into the wisdom body, the Dharmakaya, ordinary intermediate state into the enjoyment body, Sambhogakaya, and ordinary rebirth into the emanation body, Nirmanakaya. So like I said before to Matthew, when we're doing the meditation, we go through the 8 stages in our meditation. We get to the clear light. We then think this is the Dharmakaya. And then if like using the example of sleep, you'd wake up into a dream, wouldn't you? So here is where you'd do the emanation, the enjoyment body, but instead you'd visualize a seed syllable. And then you'd wake up as the deity, which is the emanation body. In your meditation, you'd do it differently. So some practitioners like Lama Tsongkhapa achieved enlightenment in the intermediate state. So many Tibetan lamas have passed away in meditation since Tibetans first came in exile. Never mind that. So the practices these yogis do are available to those who have taken a highest tantra empowerment. They are the quickest methods for achieving enlightenment in one brief lifetime of this degenerate time. By doing these practices, you can collect in just a few years the merit that would otherwise take you 3 countless great eons to collect on the Mahayana perfection vehicle, on the sutra path. These practices have a very special arrangement, and doing the sadhana every day, the complete sadhana, not just simply generating yourself as the deity and reciting the mantra without the mandala, not like that, is a very important preparation for death. You will understand this when you have received the commentaries on the generation stage and the completion stage practices. Whether you do the long version of the sadhana or of the deity you are committed to do, or the middle-length version, they both contain the essence of the generation stage practice, transforming the 3 experiences of death, intermediate state, and rebirth. Or the yogis can use going to sleep, the dream state, and waking up, Same logic. Lama Yeshe did that. Lama Yeshe he had a bad heart, but every afternoon he'd go to sleep, but he didn't sleep. He was doing meditation. He would go into the subtle state. He'd do the clear light meditation. He'd have do the Sambhogakaya, and he'd wake up and again in the body, and he'd practice the emanation body. He didn't actually sleep. He meditated. Even the short Yamantaka sadhana, for example, has these 3 important points. By meditating in this way, you prepare your mental continuum by purifying ordinary death, ordinary intermediate state, and ordinary rebirth, enabling you to actualize the path-time Dharmakaya, the path-time Sambhogakaya, and the path-time Nimanakaya, thus planting the seeds to achieve the actual 3 bodies. When you just recite the words, there is, of course, a positive imprint left on your mind, but you are not strongly preparing your mind as you would if you were actually to meditate. Serkon Tensab Rinpoche used to emphasize very much that if you are busy and you can't do much meditation in the deity sadhanas, when it comes to your daily commitments, you should do more elaborate meditation for your main deity, for your own one, your yidam, the one you have chosen, the one that you've got the karmic connection with in this life, that is your special practice. And then you can do your other sadhanas quickly. However, in all your sadhanas, you must do the 3 kayas meditation, even if it's not elaborate, even if you don't follow the extensive procedures. You should at least meditate on the last point, the 4 qualities of the foundation, having the divine pride, thinking, this is the result time Dharmakaya, this is me. And then on the day you die, because you have trained your mind by doing your sadhanas every day, you are able to recognize what's happening, the 25 stages of dissolution without missing any, just as you had meditated. Because your mind is well trained, you are able to recognize the clear light. And during the intermediate state, and at the time of birth as well, you'll be able to meditate on, to visualize the deity. Practicing the highest tantra path like this, using death as a quick path to enlightenment, is incredible. It is the quickest way to purify the dualistic view. In other words, having prepared during the generation stage, on the basis of that realization, you then actualize the path-time Dharmakaya, the Sambhogakaya, and Nimanakaya on the completion stage, actually ceasing the intellectually acquired defilements and the simultaneously born defilements. Eventually, you cut even the subtle defilements, the dualistic view, and in that moment, achieve the result time 3 bodies, enlightenment. This is how you can enjoy death, by using the tantric path, the quickest way to achieve enlightenment. So then you make aspirations that you take these empowerments and that you practice in Sili so that you're prepared to die and become a Buddha if you're really fortunate at that time. Or if you don't, get another decent human rebirth and keep on bopping. Okay, time to go. Isn't it? Yes, it is. Thank you, precious ones. So that puts imprints in, and just make the aspiration. And this is your path, and you meet your lamas, and the trouble is these days not many lamas are traveling around, but His Holiness is giving permission to do online, so we have to keep our eyes open for whether he gives highest yoga and tantric empowerments online. We have to see, but make the strong aspirations that we meet the lamas to get these empowerments, so we can have all the tools in our toolkit to get enlightened. Okay. Jangchub semchog rinpoche, ma kie panam ke gyochig, kie panyampa me payang, gong ne gong du pa basho. Gewadi nyudodag, lama sange drubyone, drowa chikyang marupa, dei sala gopasho. And may we never develop, even for a moment, wrong views towards the deeds of our most precious gurus. With faith and respect gained from seeing their goodness, may their full inspiration flow into our hearts. Thank you, precious people.
Venerable, may I do one last prayer?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so I'll do the, Hillary, would you put up the Thanksgiving mandala, please? I'll start. Saji Bhaki Jukshing Me Dok Tram Ri Rab Lingji Nide Genpadi Sangye Jingu Bikte Uar Idroku Damada Jingla Chopashog. Jets. May my venerable Lama's life be firm, his wide divine action spread in the 10 directions. May the torch of the teachings of Lozang always remain, dispelling the darkness of all beings in the 3 realms. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamniriyatayami.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Shankar. Okay, darling people, that's it. Food for thought. Never give up. Be positive. Identify your good qualities. Have divine pride. Want to become the Buddha. Identify with, and that's a cause of becoming a Buddha. What are you doing, Shankar?
One last time.
Okay, go on then.
Mother of the victorious ones of the 3 times and 10 directions, Dharmakaya, the great bliss embraced by great compassion. My perfect Aryatara, who in an ordinary form are the guide for us, pitiful transmigrating beings left guideless, how kind you are. May all your wishes be instantly fulfilled, and may your life be stable until samsara ends. Almighty One, you who destroy all the enemy of delusions, who reveal the dharma of scripture and realization, spreading it in the mental continuum of transmigrating beings, thereby eliminating the 2 obscurations, including their imprints, how kind you are. May all your wishes be instantly fulfilled, and may your life be stable until samsara ends.
Okie dokie, petals. Thank you, darlings. Thank you, precious ones. Never give up, never give up, never give up, okay? Identify with your good qualities. Have the courage to do it, okay? Have the courage to do it. You'll be delighted. And you get into the new habits, and you'll be so joyful all the time. Okay, darlings. Much love. Goodbye.